Life stories, where ordinary moments turn into unforgettable journeys. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that just might change the way you see the world. Now, imagine this. A struggling single dad walks into a quiet small town diner with his 6-year-old daughter, expecting nothing more than pancakes and a peaceful morning. But before he can sit down, the little girl does something no one sees coming. She walks up to a complete stranger, looks her straight in the eyes, and says, "Are you my mom?" The diner falls silent. The woman freezes. And in that split second, everything begins to unravel. Was it just a child's imagination, or a truth buried in the past, finally waking up? Stay with us, because this story, it's about fate, forgotten family, and how one innocent question can change everything. The smell of bacon and brewed coffee curled through the early morning air, wrapping around the sleepy streets of Willow Creek like a warm memory. The Maple and Main Diner, tucked on the corner of a quiet intersection, looked like any other place in any other small town. But that morning, someone was about to disrupt the ordinary. Jack Morgan pushed open the heavy diner door with a tired grunt, the bell above giving its familiar jingle like a welcome home sigh. His 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, followed beside him, clutching her sketch pad like it held the secrets of the universe. Jack nodded toward the man behind the counter. "Morning, Frank." "Morning, Jack," Frank Delaney replied with a grin, flicking his rag over the worn countertop. "The usual?" Jack smiled faintly and gestured toward their table by the window, the one they always sat at, where the sun spilled across the checkered floor like a quiet blessing. Sophie climbed into the booth, already opening her sketch pad. Jack slid in across from her and studied her little fingers moving the pencil in circles, swirls, smiling stick figures, and lately, faces. Always faces. Always eyes. "You in the mood for pancakes or scrambled eggs today, Soph?" Without looking up, she whispered, "Pancakes and apple juice." Same as every morning. Jack raised 2 fingers toward Frank, who already had the order in motion. The diner was a kind of sanctuary for Jack, something dependable in a life that never quite stayed upright. He worked 2 jobs, carried too many regrets, and loved one small girl with everything he had. Sophie had arrived in his life the way some storms do, sudden, irreversible, and leaving everything changed. She had been found swaddled in pink, left outside a church on a freezing November morning. No note, no name, just a baby. Jack had been delivering supplies nearby. By the end of the week, she was in his arms, and nothing had been the same since. Sophie looked up suddenly. "Daddy?" Jack leaned in. "Yeah, sweetheart. What did Mommy look like?" His heart twisted in that quiet, familiar way. "She had a beautiful heart," he said gently, though he'd never known the woman. "That's what I like to think." Sophie nodded like she understood something Jack didn't. Moments later, the bell above the door rang again, and this time, everything shifted. She stepped in like she didn't belong, like she didn't want to be noticed, but couldn't help drawing eyes. Claire Whitmore. Her coat was a perfect cut, her posture precise, her sunglasses pushed up like armor. She glanced around briefly, scanning the room, then chose the booth farthest from everyone else. Jack barely noticed her, but Sophie did. Her pencil stopped moving. Her eyes locked onto the woman like she was seeing a ghost. "Daddy." Sophie's voice was a hush of wonder. "That lady looked sad." Jack glanced up. Claire sat alone, her hands resting on the table, but her eyes drifting toward nowhere. Her expression was unreadable, but her shoulders spoke volumes, of a woman holding together the pieces of something cracked. Before Jack could reply, Sophie quietly slipped out of the booth. "Wait, Sophie." He started to stand, confused, unsure. She clutched her sketch pad and walked with strange confidence, straight toward Claire's table. Frank stopped drying a mug. The conversation in the diner dipped, the air tightening. Claire looked up, startled. Sophie stood before her, holding out the sketch pad like it was a treasure she had to deliver. And then, in a voice that sliced through the air, she asked, "Are you my mom?" The room froze. Claire's eyes widened. Jack's stomach dropped. Every sound, the clatter of forks, the hum of music, fell away. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. She just stared at the little girl with wide hazel eyes that mirrored her own more than she realized. Jack reached them, voice tight. I'm sorry, she doesn't usually. But Claire shook her head. It's okay. Her voice, barely audible, cracked on the edges. She looked at Sophie like she was staring at a truth too long buried. Jack gently led Sophie back to their table. She didn't resist. She just looked down at her drawing again, her cheeks pink, her mouth tight like she didn't understand why her heart suddenly felt so full and so confused. Claire didn't leave. Not immediately. She sat in her booth with her untouched coffee and eyes that kept wandering back toward Sophie, and Frank leaned toward Jack as he refilled his cup. Funny thing about kids, he murmured. Sometimes they see things we're too afraid to. Jack didn't respond. His chest felt too heavy. Across the diner, Claire's hand trembled as she traced the rim of her cup. She hadn't meant to stop here. She had just been driving, escaping, trying to silence the echo of a life too curated, too spotless, too empty. But now a little girl she'd never met had looked into her eyes and called her mom. Outside, the spring sun still bathed Willow Creek in gold, but inside Maple and Maine, something invisible had begun to shift. A quiet thread had been pulled, a thread that might unravel everything or tie it all together. And no one, not Jack, not Claire, and certainly not Sophie, could have predicted what came next. Or is it all just coincidence? What would you do if a stranger's child looked you in the eye and called you Mom? Do you believe in fate? Or is it all just coincidence? Stay tuned for part 2 of The Stranger at Maple and Maine, where secrets begin to surface and one little girl becomes the key to a past no one dared to unlock. The rain came fast that evening, unexpected, cold, and steady, drumming against the windows of the Maple and Maine diner like fingers tapping at a locked door. Claire Whitmore sat in her penthouse hours later, staring at the city skyline through a wall of glass. Manhattan stretched out in front of her, glittering like it always did, but tonight the lights felt distant, cold, meaningless. She couldn't stop thinking about the little girl with wide, searching eyes, with hair like a storm and the kind of honesty that cracked through armor. Are you my mom? Claire had heard a lot of things in her life. Power plays, boardroom lies, hollow toasts over champagne, but never had 7 words lodged so deeply in her chest. She poured herself a drink, didn't touch it. Instead, her feet moved on instinct, to the far corner of the room, to a shelf she hadn't looked at in years. She reached for the old leather-bound photo album, the one that should have been thrown out but wasn't. Inside, nestled between family portraits and stiff boarding school smiles, was a single, fading photograph. Claire, no more than 18, in a hospital bed, tear-streaked, exhausted. And in her arms, wrapped in pink, impossibly small, was a baby girl. Emily. Claire's chest tightened. She had named her daughter Emily in secret, before her parents took over, hired lawyers, and sealed the adoption papers before Claire could blink. They told her it was for the best, that she had a future to protect, that no one could ever know, and she had believed them. She'd built an empire, bought silence with success. But now, a little girl who looked achingly like Emily had walked straight into her life and asked a question no stranger should ask. Could it really be possible? Claire slammed the album shut and exhaled. No, it was crazy. Coincidence. But deep down she already knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was the past waking up. The next morning in Willow Creek, the storm had passed, but Jack Morgan still felt unsettled. He watched Sophie at the kitchen table, her crayons scattered across the surface, her focus locked on a new drawing. Another woman's face, kind eyes, flowing dark hair. He knew that face. It was Claire. Sophie, he said gently, can I ask you something? She looked up. Why did you think that woman yesterday might be your mom? Sophie tilted her head like it was obvious. She's the lady in my dreams. She always smiles at me, like she knows me. Jack blinked, stunned. You've seen her before? Not in real life, Sophie said with a shrug. Just in here. She tapped her chest. Jack didn't know what to say to that. Kids had wild imaginations, but this was too specific, too real. Back at the diner, Frank was already wiping down the counters when Jack and Sophie walked in. You're early, Frank noted, pouring coffee without being asked. Jack gave a tired nod. Yeah, needed the comfort. As Sophie climbed into their usual booth, Frank leaned in a little. She's not here yet. Jack looked up. Who? Frank smiled knowingly. The woman from yesterday. You were looking for her, right? Jack started to deny it, but didn't. Because the truth was, he was. And like a scene from a movie, the bell above the door rang at that very moment. Claire. Her hair was pulled back today, no sunglasses. Her expression unsure, but more open than the day before. Her eyes found Sophie immediately, and Sophie lit up like sunrise. Jack rose halfway, unsure whether to approach her or wait. Claire crossed the diner slowly and stood at the edge of their booth. Hi, she said quietly. Sophie beamed. You came back. Claire glanced at Jack, then back at the girl. Would it be okay if I sat for a minute? Jack nodded. Yeah, of course. Claire slid into the booth beside Sophie. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Sophie turned her sketch pad toward Claire. I drew you again, she said proudly. Claire stared down at the image, her own face rendered in the careful, earnest lines of a child. A heart floated above the head. Beneath it, Sophie had written a single word in blocky, crooked letters. Home. Claire swallowed hard. Jack studied her. You okay? Claire nodded slowly. I don't know what this is, or how it's even possible, but I haven't stopped thinking about her. About all of this, Jack exhaled. Neither have I. Sophie interrupted, her voice soft but firm. Maybe we're supposed to find each other. Neither adult could answer that, but deep down, both of them were starting to believe it. What if the people we're meant to find are the ones we've been dreaming about all along? Join us for part 3 of The Stranger at Maple and Main, where buried truths rise, connections deepen, and one impossible question demands an answer. The next day in Willow Creek dawned unusually quiet. Outside, the breeze rolled softly across the sleepy streets, brushing past storefronts and swaying wind chimes. Inside the Maple and Main diner, the air smelled like cinnamon, butter, and something else harder to name: anticipation. Jack Morgan sat in the usual booth, his coffee going cold. Across from him, Sophie hummed a tune under her breath, coloring in a new page of her sketch pad. She didn't seem anxious, not even a little, but Jack? He could barely sit still. Because today, everything might change. The bell above the diner door jingled, and in walked Claire Whitmore. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her steps were slower, heavier. She was carrying something in her hand, a single manila envelope, slightly crumpled at the corners. She reached the booth, offered a quiet nod, and sat down. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the jukebox and Sophie's pencil scratching the page. Then Claire placed the envelope on the table. I called a friend at the county records office, she said, voice tight. It took some convincing, and a lot of favors. Jack said nothing. Claire looked down at the envelope like it might burn her. Her name was Emily Whitmore. She died during childbirth. Her baby was placed into emergency foster care and adopted a week later. Her eyes lifted to Sophie, then to Jack. You named her Sophie. Jack swallowed hard. I didn't know her name. I just knew she was mine the second I held her. Claire's eyes glistened. She was my daughter, which makes Sophie, Jack finished for her quietly, your granddaughter. Silence settled over them like a heavy snowfall. Sophie looked up at that moment, her voice breaking through the weight. What's in the envelope? Claire hesitated, then slid it across to Jack. He opened it. Inside were 2 photos, one of a young woman, Emily, long hair, warm eyes, and the other, a hospital bracelet. Baby girl, date, time. Sophie stared at the picture of Emily. She looks like me. Jack blinked fast, but it was Claire who reached out and touched Sophie's hand. She was beautiful, Claire whispered, strong, kind, but she was also very young and scared, and I wasn't brave enough to fight for her then. Her voice cracked. But maybe I can do better now. Sophie's fingers curled around Claire's. You can. Jack watched them, something tight loosening in his chest. He had raised Sophie on his own, carrying a weight he never named. But now, he wasn't alone in it anymore. And maybe, just maybe, neither was she. Weeks passed, and something new began to grow. Not fast, not flashy, but real. Claire started showing up not just at the diner, but at the park, at Sophie's school recitals, at Jack's porch on rainy days with a thermos of hot tea and a look in her eyes like she was finally learning how to stay. They didn't call it a family, not yet, but Sophie didn't need the word. She already felt it. One Saturday afternoon, they visited a quiet lake house just outside town. Claire hadn't been there in years. Dust covered the furniture, old photos lined the mantel. It was the last place she had ever felt at peace, before everything fell apart. Now, as she watched Jack and Sophie skipping rocks across the surface, Claire felt something she hadn't in decades: hope. That night, they sat together on the wide wooden porch, just the three of them. Sophie leaned against Claire's arm, her eyes already drooping. "I like it here," she mumbled. Claire smiled gently. "Me too." Jack cleared his throat. "You ever think about staying longer?" Claire glanced at him. "In Willow Creek?" He nodded. "With us." She looked at him carefully. "You really want me here?" Jack hesitated, then gave the most honest answer he could. "You're already part of us. We're just catching up to it." Claire reached over, took his hand. They didn't need to say more. Sophie stirred slightly, still half asleep. "Can this be home now?" Jack and Claire looked at each other. Both of them nodded. "Yes, sweetheart," Claire whispered, brushing Sophie's hair back. "It already is." And sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected moment in a diner, a child's voice, a forgotten name, and suddenly everything changes. Walls fall, truths rise, and a stranger becomes family. What about you? Did this story move you? What did you feel watching Jack, Claire, and Sophie find their way back to each other? If this story touched your heart, drop a heart or comment 100 below to let us know. Which country are you watching from? We'd love to know how far this story is reaching. And if you believe in second chances and unexpected family, please share this story with someone you care about. Because sometimes the most ordinary moments become the ones that change everything. Thank you for watching. We hope it stays with you long after the screen fades to black.